Friday, April 19th saw the start of a titanic exercise in democratic governance. Over the next several weeks, 969 million people in India will cast their ballots in the world's largest election. The Indian general elections, held every 5 years, are to elect members of the Lok Sabha, the lower house of India's parliament. The winning party, or coalition of parties, will be able to form a new government and choose the country's prime minister. But getting to that point takes a lot of time. This year, the election will take just over 6 weeks, 44 days to be exact. And there's plenty for voters to choose from. India has more than 2,500 political parties, although just 10 of them hold 86% of the Lok Sabha's seats. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been in power for a decade now, and his party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP, is one of the largest political parties in the world, with over 180 million members. Recent polls suggest an easy win and a third term for Mr. Modi are likely, but there are some challenges the BJP has to overcome first. Mr. Modi aims for his alliance of parties to win over 400 seats out of 543, with the BJP aiming for 370 seats of its own. But the party faces difficulty gaining support in the southern states, which alone contribute over 30% of India's GDP. Welcome to the Year of Elections, a podcast series brought to you by the Opinion Desk at The National. I'm Sulaiman Hakimi, The National's opinion editor, speaking to you from our studio here in Abu Dhabi. And this week, we're looking at India's general elections. I'm joined this week by Tanya Datta, The National's correspondent in India, to understand how the country's vote is unfolding. So Tanya, can you first explain to us, what does it feel like for Indians to participate in a vote of this size? Does it feel as large and complex for the average voter there as it seems for those of us watching from outside? Or does it seem on the ground to be just like any other vote?
It is indeed one of the biggest, in fact, the largest elections in the world. It definitely feels different for us also because this year more than 970 million people are eligible to vote. So it is, looking at the sheer size and scale, this certainly feels different this year.
Okay, so walk us through the schedule a little bit. This election takes 44 days. Why does it take that long? What are the key dates and the polling days, and why does India need 6 weeks to hold an election?
India, with a population of 1.4 billion people, it is the world's most populous and largest democracy. And because of its colossal population, and then it is also geographically the world's seventh largest country. There are 28 states and 9 federally ruled territories. So the topography extends from Himalayan mountains, desert, dense forests, and coastal areas. This is why it is going to take more than 44 days to hold polls this year. The elections would start on April 19, and there's a staggered phase it will continue for 7 phases. The next date would be May 7th, then May 13th, May 20th, May 25, and June 1. The votes will be counted on June 4, and the results will be announced on the same day.
So if they're counting the votes, if it takes 44 days just to carry out the election, and then the votes are ready on June 4th, how on earth do they know the results that quickly?
So India uses electronic voting machines, which has a list of the candidates and symbols of the political parties. So the voters have to press the button next to their preferred candidate's name to cast their vote. And an officer is appointed by the Election Commission of India, which is the polling body, who supervises the counting. So there is a fixed date of counting, for example, June 4 this time. Each EVM is used to cast the ballot electronically, and it is connected to a device which provides the number of total votes polled and breakup of votes polled for each candidate. So once the voting is held, the EVMs are put back in sealed boxes, and they're kept in strong rooms to avoid any tampering. And on the date of the counting, these boxes are reopened, and in the presence of the polling agents and candidates in the constituency, those votes are counted.
I just want to pick up on something you said about tampering. I think in any election, there's always a concern that, things are going to get a little out of hand. There might be some tampering, some corruption at the low level, if not at the top level. And this is a huge election. So obviously those risks, just in terms of probability, are even greater. But could you tell us, do people in India see that as a real risk? And what is the government doing to prevent that from happening?
The ECI, the Election Commission of India, claims that, these are tamper-proof. But some critics have actually, taken the issue to the court. The Supreme Court is actually hearing a case where, some petitioners have asked, or they're urging the government to sort of look into these EVM machines because they say that these can be tempered. Although this is, being debated, the government definitely says that, these are tamper-proof.
So, I mean, if the debate's ongoing, it's a little bit late now, isn't it? Because the elections, I mean, we're recording this on April 18th. The elections will start tomorrow, April 19th. So is there any need to kind of wait for those questions to be resolved, or are they just proceeding full steam ahead and then they'll deal with any criticism after?
Yeah, they're simply continuing with the hearing for now, and the voters will use EVM machines starting tomorrow.
Okay. The other interesting thing about India is that, it's got a huge number of languages and cultures and traditions across the country. How does that impact the electoral process? I mean, not just in terms of communicating to voters, but when it comes to parties trying to campaign and reach out to all these different groups. I mean, are the main parties kind of isolated to specific languages and cultures, or are they trying to reach out across the whole spectrum of Indian society?
Yes, definitely. The vastness and diversity of the country certainly has a great impact on the politics, right from the dominance of regional parties in certain pockets or certain quarters of the country, where the so-called national parties, they have failed to penetrate even after 75 years of independence. For example, in southern India, and especially states like Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, which are basically the political discourse often is, preserving their culture. For example, the Tamil language, it is said to be the world's oldest language. So, they're trying to preserve their culture, their language, their food from the onslaught of these national parties, especially the BJP, which is trying to promote Hindi. Most of the regional parties in other states, most of the regional parties have been protecting and shielding and trying to engage in politics to avoid their regions being subsumed by the dominant national parties. For example, the BJP, which is again aiming to homogenize the country through language and culture and religion. It is trying to, promote Hindi, the language used in North India.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in large parts of India, there's a problem with things like literacy and education. So if you're a voter in maybe impoverished parts of India or rural parts of India where literacy rates might be lower, how do you engage with the voting process? How does enfranchisement work in those places?
Yeah, so, these political leaders, political parties are engaged in huge campaigns, massive campaigns. So almost every person, every voters, they know the party symbol. So these voting machines, they not just have the candidate's name, but also the symbol of the party. So even if you do not know a particular candidate in your constituency, they do not actually have to worry about, the candidate because there's the party symbol. And in the end of the day, people are actually voting for the party and not the candidate, sadly.
Talk a little bit about that. I mean, maybe introduce us to, we all know the BJP, which is the party currently in power. Who are the other major parties and why are things so party focused rather than candidate focused?
There are more than 2,600 registered parties in the country, but there are 6 national parties, including Mr. Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party and the grand old party, which is called the Indian National Congress. The Indian National Congress has given the country 3 prime ministers since the independence. Then there are 50 regional parties. Some of the other major parties are DMK, which is a ruling party in Tamil Nadu. It is called Dravid Munnetra Kazhagam. The other party is in West Bengal. It is called Trinamool Congress. These parties, for example, the DMK and TMC, they are part of the India bloc or India coalition with the Indian National Congress. They are giving a tough fight to Mr. Modi's BJP. The BJP has failed to penetrate in Tamil Nadu. The BJP has failed to penetrate in West Bengal. So in this election, these parties have teamed together to basically, give a tough fight to Mr. Modi.
Yeah, so why is it that the BJP fails to penetrate in these areas that you mentioned?
Yeah, it varies from, the culture, the language. BJP is mainly trying to promote Hindu hegemony, which is really prominent, very prominent in the northern India. In southern India, they do not really, irrespective of the religion, they're trying to preserve their culture. Whereas in the north, it is more religion. It's more religion centric. The politics is more religion centric. So this is one of the reasons, in fact, major reasons that BJP has so far failed to penetrate in South India or even in West Bengal, which is an eastern state.
Tell us a little bit about the India Alliance. I mean, tell us what it stands for, first of all, because I think that's maybe a bit confusing for people who aren't familiar with Indian politics, why it's called the India Alliance. And then tell us whether they have much hope of success as the main opposition alliance in this election.
So the India Alliance is basically, it's called Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance. And it is an alliance of 26 parties. They are actually challenging Mr. Modi's BJP because they believe that Modi's government has been harming the social, secular, and democratic values of the country through its sustained agenda of championing for the cause of Hindu hegemony or the majority population, which is making India a Hindu nation. So they are trying to band together to challenge those ideas of the Prime Minister and his Hindu nationalist party.
Do you think that they'll be able to succeed? I mean, what does the recent polling say?
The supporters and political commentators, they're of the opinion that Mr. Modi is, in all likelihood, will be the next prime minister. He is riding high on his popularity of fulfilling the poll promises in the last two elections, as well as his Hindu agenda.
Tell us about the role of the media in this election. So there is a kind of sense overseas, I think, that the majority of the media in India is, in favor of the ruling party. But is that true in this election from what you've seen? And does that shape the result in any way?
Yes, most certainly, because there are two sides of it. Prime Minister Modi is definitely getting a lot of support from the media in the country. You can see there are biases, there are programs, there are anchors, there are news anchors, and there are programs which openly support Prime Minister Modi and his government, or at least, they champion for the agenda of, say, Hindu nationalism. So there are programs which focus entirely on Mr. Modi's policies. For example, when he unveiled the Ram Temple, which is being built on the site of a 16th century mosque that was raised by Hindu right-wing members, there were live visuals on all the news channels. So the media has definitely played a role, and it is definitely playing a role in sort of, pushing Mr. Modi's popularity. It is helping with his popularity. But then the press freedom index in the country has also gone down. I mean, anybody who is a dissenter or who is a critic of Mr. Modi, they have faced jails. There are dozens of journalists who are in the jails. So it's like there is a section of media which is supporting Mr. Modi openly. And then there's a section of media who is not, who are at the receiving end.
Okay. So I think as a last question, maybe just help us understand the role of the prime minister in India's parliamentary democracy. I mean, the country has a president and it has a prime minister. This election is, geared up to choose the prime minister. Why is the prime minister such a powerful figure in the country? And, where does their influence come from? Is that a new thing under, Modi's time in office, or is that a change?
India's president is actually a ceremonial position. She's the ceremonial head of the country with really no powers and mostly acts on the advice of the government. And this government, the prime minister is the head of this government. He's the head of the executive of the government and the leader of the council of ministers. So he is the one who is making these policies and who is aiding and helping the president.
We'll be looking more at the Indian elections in a second part of this episode to explore the key players, the main political parties, and the candidates participating in the elections, their backgrounds, and their potential impact on the country's future. Thanks a lot for listening. Please follow and subscribe to get all the latest episodes as soon as they come out. This episode was produced by Dua Farid and Arthur Edison, and I've been your host, Sulaiman Hakimi.